This is the Elite Game Developers Podcast about entrepreneurs and investors building the games companies of the future. Today I'm talking with Christian Rees, who is the co-founder and CEO of Playtest Cloud, a playtesting service startup from Berlin, Germany. I'm fascinated about why playtests, surveys, and focus groups have always been in the shadow of metrics and analytics as a decision-making tool for game development. You can learn so much from reading player sentiment and observing their behavior when they're playing the game. We'll now cover this and more with Christian. Hi, Christian. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Joachim. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. It's been a while since we last talked a few months ago, and then we were talking about the sponsorship for the podcast. And I was thinking that, man, I need to have you on board because you're an entrepreneur yourself, and there's so much that you guys are working with the game developers out there. And it's a benefit to hear all of this stuff, that how you can help the developers. So I'm super happy that we got this arranged.
Yeah, thank you. It's been fun for me to listen to your podcast and also see how other people are approaching building companies in this space. And I learned a lot from it already.
Yeah, there is no one way that people are doing it. And I think it's cool to get all those lessons learned and the ways that people have failed or found success to be shared openly. Because I think, why do you want to kind of invent the wheel constantly?
Mm-hmm.
Just share everything, and then we'll grow together as the industry grows.
Mm-hmm.
But hey, let's kick off the podcast here with getting down into the questions. And how did you realize that you needed to found Playtest Cloud? What was the reason there?
Yeah, so I care a lot about gaming. I'm a big gamer myself, and I'm really interested in giving things a good user experience. I have a background in computer science, so I'm used to building things. And often when you build something, you notice, okay, the way I thought it should work is actually not what my users are doing with it. And I saw this even as a student building some vacation planners and so on for the company I was at. And close to when we were finishing our studies, Marvin, my co-founder, and I were thinking about starting a company because it felt like that's the time to do it. We didn't have any commitments yet. We didn't have a high standard of living, just coming out of university. So costs of living were low. And yeah, we were thinking about what we could do. Marvin had a background in building games, and we all enjoyed playing games. And we looked around and saw that back then the big games were Candy Crush, Heyday. That was around 2012. And what those games did so uniquely was that everybody could pick them up. My mom, who is not a gamer at all, I could give her the phone with Candy Crush and she could play it. Mm-hmm. And that was because they really thought about giving the games a good player experience. They looked at usability. They actually tested these games with people who haven't seen them before to find out how they behaved and iterate and optimize. And that impressed us. And when we looked at how that's actually done, we were a bit shocked because there was no good software for that at all. The status quo back then was that companies had a list of testers at the front desk. And when the team said yeah, we'd like to try this out with a player, they emailed some people off that list, hoped they would come to the office. Often they had no shows. And that was mainly how it worked in mobile gaming. Mm. In contrast, on the PC and console side, it was extremely sophisticated. They had user research labs. They had people with PhDs in psychology who really knew how to run these studies, how to design it well from a methodical point of view. But in mobile, we had a lot of technical challenges. It was hard to even get recordings done on a phone so you could see what people are touching. Yeah, you probably know that yourself.
I remember those days. It was super difficult. We're doing some focus groups back in the day was the only way to get some proper outside help to actually like do these tests if you didn't want to recruit the people yourself, like friends and family had already played the game.
Yeah.
And the focus group was very, very expensive, time consuming. There was nothing really effective.
Yeah. So long story short, we saw a business opportunity there. We thought, okay, we know how to build stuff. We want to make things easy. Let's take this problem of testing a mobile game with real players and make it so easy that even if it's Friday evening, 5 p.m., you actually want to start your weekend already. You could still go to our website and start your playtest, have the videos in the morning, and you don't have to worry about any of these tedious aspects, finding the right people, having no shows, dealing with the devs to like put some SDKs in. So that was our initial idea. We wanted to make it easy for the people who were building all the mobile games of those days to get feedback from the players. And yeah, that's how the whole idea started. And yeah, I think nowadays we've got a product that fulfills that. And we're really proud of that.
In the early days, what was kind of like the first version like? Because I know that the service works in a way that you upload the build, and then what you do is you select the players and hit the launch the test button, basically. And then there might be some other options there that you need to set, but that's about it. And then you get the videos to watch in about 48 hours max to look at how people are playing the game. But what was the early stage experience for the developers there?
Actually, on the developer side, we always had it pretty much like that. So when we thought about how we start building all the parts of Playtest Cloud, we kind of faked a lot of things. We put the website up there. We had a nice order form. And also once you got the results, you could always, even from the very first playtest we did, make notes in your video and so on. What we didn't have at all was the whole backend for that. So in the very first month and even years, a lot of the stuff was manual. And like we literally got an email like, okay, they ordered this. Here on Amazon is the build. And now we had to open up our console on the computer and do a lot of like hacker magic to make all that work.
How long did you do that phase before you got it well automated that you basically could stay away from the computer?
Yeah, it feels longer than it actually was, I think. Definitely a couple of months until we automated the most common steps. We were also a very small team. It was mainly Marvin and me at first. Then we had some student interns on the engineering side. So we really knocked them down one by one and did the main things, the things that annoyed us too much first, because back then we also needed a lot of time for other things, and everything we could automate was good. But we always wanted to make sure that we're not falling into this pattern where we're just coding for coding's sake, because being computer scientists, that's what we like doing. That's where our comfort zone was. So yeah, we would have liked sitting down there on day one, just coding out the whole thing. But we would have built something that doesn't actually reflect how the business actually works, because we didn't know yet.
That's actually like the interesting thing there is that you have your first customers, like probably spread a bit like word of mouth there. But the interesting thing for me is, how did you find the testers? How did you start building that pool?
Yeah, so we had no idea how to get started with that at first, actually. Like the very first test was with friends of us. So those were all Germans, and usually our customers want to test in the United States or in Canada, because those are your important tier 1 markets. You want to see how the games are received there. So in the early days, we started on Reddit, posting in gaming communities, looking for people who wanted to give new games a try. And that worked pretty well. I mean, we didn't have a lot of tests back then in the early days, so we didn't need millions of testers. So even with a stock of like 200-300 players, we could do quite a lot. And then later on, we mainly went to Facebook doing advertisement and are using other user acquisition channels to find them, similar to how you would advertise for a game. We go to those same places, but instead of downloading the next big mobile hit, they'll sign up on Playtest Cloud to become playtesters.
And it's like a part of the gig economy in a sense that those people are, getting small, like rewards or salary for playing games and testing them.
Exactly. Yeah. You might get like a game once or twice a month. If you're quick enough to accept that test, you play it, you get a few dollars after. So yeah, it's like a nice reward for them to do this. They can buy a game on Steam or whatever they want to do with that money. And it makes everything fair, I think, because they're also putting their time in it.
That sounds cool. When you started seeing developers run these tests, what were the early learnings there and how did you build the features out from those learnings?
Yeah, so the very first actual version of Playtest Cloud only let you order a first-time user experience test in which we recorded the first 15 minutes of gameplay. We didn't offer anything beyond that. Like, yeah, you could specify the gender of the players you wanted, age, and a few basic things, but that was it. What we always had, though, was we put a field in there. Hey, do you have a custom request? And over time, customers said, oh, yeah, can you have them play for half an hour? Can you have them play for an hour? Oh, I really need people who are experienced with Clash of Clans or something like that. And in the early days, like whenever we got one of these in, as I said, we loved coding. We just put that feature in. We told them like, oh, yeah, totally. We'll do it this time. Next time, you can just click the checkbox. Then, like, as we got a few more orders, we prioritized what we saw more often and also found the common themes there. So very quickly, we found that people are always asking about specific genres that people should have experience with. So we added those. We recruited players fitting that. And with all the feature requests we got, we always looked at whether that's something we wanted to put in as included services or if it would be like a new product. If it was going to be a new product, we kind of set a quote to the client saying like, oh yeah, we can totally do this. Here would be the price. If they said, sounds good, we knew that would be a feature we want to put into the actual product because we actually have a paying customer for it. And we found that to be a very good filter. Customers will wish for a lot of things, but when it actually comes to spending money for them, a lot of people are suddenly having different priorities, if you will. And it's a good filter for us as entrepreneurs to know what's really important, what's valuable to the client, and what is just nice to have.
You guys have been this kind of like a bootstrapped company from the beginning. Was that a conscious choice early on?
Yeah, I think so. We got a little bit of seed money in the early days from our university through some startup competition that they did. But that was barely enough to hold us over for a year. And at that point, we had a few choices. We could have just stopped working on this, looked for a job in the industry and went on our software engineering ways. The other approach would have been to look for funding, but we enjoyed building stuff too much. We didn't really want to go through all those pitches and cater to the investors. We were talking with a few companies back then and a few investment companies, and it didn't really feel like the path we wanted to go down on. And instead, we did some software development on the side to cross-finance the development of Playtest Cloud. And as our business also picked up on the Playtest Cloud side, we could do less and less of this work for hire on the side and have been doing that for a few years now, obviously. And it's given us a lot of flexibility in how we build the business and what we put the priorities on, because we are the ones making the decision. We don't have to chase the next round. We don't need to meet some benchmark that somebody else put on us. And if we don't, well, then we might have to close down the company. And we always wanted to go for a more sustainable business approach where, we charge money for our services, we pay our expenses with that, and we invest what we have left over to build the next big thing. And we're really happy with that.
Yeah, it's kind of like a growth that you can build on top of constantly. You know that it's going forward, but it doesn't need to be something that, happens in a year like crazy growth.
Yeah.
You'll anyways have it without I think you guys are super unique in the space still. And there's so much more companies that probably never heard of you guys, but like seeing the benefits finally, like when another developer is utilizing what you guys are doing, and then it spreads.
Yeah,
Super
word of
cool.
mouth is such a big channel for us. And I think also being bootstrapped, we can focus on just giving our clients the best possible experience because we can really prioritize those long-term relationships. We don't need to get this big deal today because next month the investor needs the numbers. We can really do what we think is best for our clients. Yeah, it's been a joy working like that.
Let's talk about the playtesting. In your words, why do you think playtests are important?
It's the main way to see how your players actually behave in the game. When you're making a game, you have a lot of assumptions about what people will do, what they will enjoy, what they know about the sort of game already. And a playtest really shows you what part of that is true, and you can't really fake it as the player. So you get this video and you see somebody playing your game for the first time. And in the tests that we do, we usually don't want to give them any instructions on the game because when you download a game from the App Store, you're not getting any instructions beforehand either. You see the name and that's it. And either then you figure it out and enjoy it, or you delete it after 30 seconds or whatever, like the metric is nowadays. And with a playtest, you can observe how players behave in the game. You'll see if they play it how you thought they would play it, if the way they play it gives them the experience that you had in mind for the game. And in addition to that, we are also asking players to think aloud while they're playing. So if they come across something that they don't understand, they'll verbalize that. They'll tell you like, yeah, I don't know what this thing is right now. Like, why does it keep nagging me? And you as the game designer can probably connect the dots there and you see like, oh, okay, they missed this earlier. Now they don't know what this does. And you can fix that one thing, run another test and see if this problem is now fixed, get people a little further and little by little craft the experience that you really have in mind and make sure that the players that you're aiming this game at will have that experience.
Yeah, I remember like when we were developing our world, we discovered that the players, when they were going to shooting the zombies, they were tapping the gun because the game instructed them to tap to shoot. Mm-hmm. They were tapping the gun, most of them. But then we wanted them to actually tap the screen where the zombies are, that they would shoot the walkers, mm-hmm. as they're called in the lore. And then we changed the text to tap the walkers to shoot them. And then people got the idea. And this was something that we discovered through Playtest Cloud. And it was nice. Like this kind of moment that it might have come through traditional playtests when you're watching a friend play it, but there's always the chance that they knew what the game was about. Mm-hmm. And they might be skewed to actually like skip showing this issue where they don't know anything about the game. Mm-hmm. Have you seen like similar moments that you've heard of from developers?
Yeah, a good one that comes to mind is from a hidden object game that one of our customers was working on. And, hidden object games often have a lot of story and they've got characters. And in this case, the developers wanted to add a very trustworthy character that the main character relates to. So they put him in a suit and they put this character in a suit in the game. And in the playtest, completely unrelated to this question, people kept commenting on how sketchy this guy looked. They didn't trust him at all. And the reasoning of the players was, he looks like a business guy. I don't trust him. And they didn't expect that at all when they created the artwork and put that into the game. And it was one of these random finds in the playtest. And I think they tweaked how the character looked and how they introduced him after. But that's how many meanings you can have in like one illustration. And in this case, it really painted the story in a different light for the players without the developers ever expecting that.
That is interesting because the player is very immersed in the game, but the developers might just be thinking about, the menus and the buttons and are they tapping the buttons or not?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. There's so many things that can come up that you just don't realize. That comes to mind. Like there's a lot of user experience people, game design people who are usually involved in the playtests. But have you seen or talked to a lot of people who aren't specifically user experience, who are still like very much keen to learn more about playtests and interact with them?
Yeah, we see more of that nowadays. They use playtests with a different aim, though. So artists are like one group that we see at some of our clients, and it's for reasons like in the story that I just told, where you have a character and they don't create that emotion or that feeling in the player that you're aiming for. And we've seen this not just with characters, but with food in games that are about food, where something could look appetizing or not. Another group that I find so interesting are people working in localization for games. And we don't get to do this so often because we mainly focus on playtesting in English-speaking markets, and a lot of the studios we work with make the games in English first. But we get a few scenarios like this, and it's interesting because for people working in localization, it's about making sure that on one hand, you're aware of the cultural specificities in those countries. So if you're making a game, we had this one game that was also a cooking game that worked really badly in France, and they weren't sure why. And the game was translated well. They did some QA on all the translations and had that checked, and they couldn't figure out why the game was having so much worse retention than in all their other markets. And what they found out in the test, and I don't want to interpret this too much, but they found out that people didn't like the food. And the game was all about cooking, and it was made for an American audience. So many of the dishes were more what you would cook in the US and not what you cook normally when you're living in France. And they identified this as one of the points that they didn't take into account enough in the localization of the game. Wow. And then there are, of course, other smaller things, like when you have a word game. We've had a few of those where also the people doing the translations to other languages wanted to make sure that people know all these words that they're using, even when you're working in different English-speaking markets. You want to make sure that all those local terms are used correctly and also used in the correct geography.
That is interesting. What is the kind of the biggest and the best impact that you've seen usually for developers, at least in recent times? Where is the best impact?
Yeah, the one game I'm always thinking about, I can't mention the name here, but I'll describe what happened, was a game that was very close to soft launch. And we just got to the point with that client where they were interested in running a playtest. And for them, it was more of an exercise like, yeah, we've got this game. No, it's pretty good. We're about to soft launch in a few weeks. And it was a big title using a very popular IP. And the playtest went horrible. So the very first interaction with the game, literally in the tutorial where you had to move one object onto another object, nobody could figure it out. Like 80% of the people were stuck on that for minutes. And you gotta imagine you're opening this game, the tutorial is explaining, hey, here's this thing you do. And it's supposed to be this one action that takes you a second. They couldn't figure it out. And the developers were shocked. They had done a lot of testing with other colleagues internally, but they all knew the game so well. They've been working on this for over a year at that point. And this movement that you have to learn in the tutorials, one that you do all the time in the game. So they were so good at it. They never encountered this issue. But yeah, in all the playtests that we ran, and we verified these results with another playtest because they couldn't believe it was that bad, happened again. And they iterated on that for a few times and made it so that everybody who downloaded the game was able to get that done in the 1 or 2 seconds that they thought it would take them. And that was a really big issue that they had no visibility on at all. That was found within the first minute of the playtest that they ran. And yeah, the game launched really well, got featured, and I can only imagine how that would have gone if they hadn't identified this issue before the launch. It would have probably gotten a lot of bad reviews and had to scramble to get an update out there. But this way, they could do that ahead of time. And well, you better believe the next time they made a game, they started testing a bit earlier because they had this good experience and they saw the value it can bring to them. But yeah, I think that's probably the biggest impact I've ever seen in such a short time that playtesting has made.
Yeah, you catch the whole issue very early on.
Yeah, and you find things that nobody was expecting because you suddenly see the game through fresh eyes.
Can you talk about the playtesters? Like, who are they? They're gamers, but they're also non-gamers there.
Yeah, so for us, we have around 200,000 nowadays. And they are people who play games from really all sorts of backgrounds. We have a lot of customers who make games that are very casual, aimed at people who don't play a lot of games. But especially nowadays, you also have a lot of mobile games that are trying to pull in audiences that traditionally play a lot of console or PC games. And for us, it's always important to have a good mix of those people in our panel. So we're mainly playtesting with players from the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada. And most of them we got through these channels that I mentioned earlier, like Facebook or other ways in which we would normally find players for games, but we found them for our tests. And yeah, like we really have people from all walks of gaming, as I'm always thinking about it, because we need to cater to so many specific requests. Like the other day, we were recruiting for players who had certain interests outside of gaming, and we easily found those because we have a lot of data on those. So yeah, it's people who enjoy gaming, but who aren't testers by any means. Like they're not QA people or something like that. They're people who just download a game to have a good time. And you would also get as the players that download your game once it's in the stores.
You guys are now in the English-speaking market, but have you thought about adding bigger markets like Russia, China, and other geos? Does it make sense for you at the moment?
Yeah, we're really interested in that. Language is a really big problem with that. So not so much on our end, but when you think about who is running these playtests, it's often the producers of the game or the user research departments at bigger companies. They might not speak these languages, and to give them a real natural experience of the people playing, we need to have them speak in their native language. So if we're doing a test in China, we can't have them speak English because that also reduces the audience that we could playtest with so much. And well, then you have videos in Russian, Chinese, and Japanese. What do you do with those? Do we translate them and then send them to the teams? Costs a lot of money, takes a lot of time. So we're not quite sure how to address that yet. But we'd love to offer that because we get asked that quite a lot. But we haven't quite figured out how to do it in the same easy way that we always want to provide services in.
Yeah, definitely. It's something that you guys could do now, but then you have a lot of other stuff and priorities. But yeah, that kind of culturalization going into the Asian markets and understanding like why the French people didn't play that particular game. I remember we probably did something at Next Games with you guys where we were testing, Korean, and we wanted you to find us Korean speakers, but that's a very special case or something. Or something like that. It is cool. The one topic that I really wanted to chat about is kind of like this future of focus groups. And so one of the cool features that you guys have is the concept testing, where you can upload pictures and then show a slideshow to the people who are running or who are participating, kind of your testers who look at a PowerPoint presentation and then they answer in their own voice what you're asking in those slides. For me, it felt like this is a mini focus group, that it's replacing what these big research companies are providing. And you guys are giving a very affordable package there. Was that your intention in the early days, thinking about the concept testing?
Yeah, to some extent. I don't think we aim quite as high as replacing focus groups or building something that could replace some of them. But we had a lot of clients at the time who built a prototype in Unity to just ask players a few questions. Like they built a slideshow, but they did it in Unity because they wanted to run it on Playtest Cloud. And we really like this idea of starting early. And if you want to get feedback from your players early on, you need to have a way of doing that even when you don't have a build yet. You have an idea of a game. You want to understand the target audience that you're interested in building a game for better. And that's really the point that we wanted to address. We wanted to create a testing setup for those people at the companies who are working on the ideas and who are quickly iterating on new concepts, on mock-ups for the games, but who aren't technical. Like they couldn't just open up Unity or some other prototyping coding tool and put together something, but they can use PowerPoint. They can use mock-up tools. You might have artists who just draw something in Photoshop. And with this concept testing feature that we built, all those people can easily put those assets on Playtest Cloud, show it to people, their target audience. And those players, like you said, look at that. You can add some questions in there, and you can very quickly and very affordably get feedback on all sorts of assets, not just games. And yeah, that really was the aim with that. And it's being used for so many different use cases. So the one you describe is one that we see a lot. Like I said earlier, we have quite a few artists now who put their characters and other assets on there if they're looking at getting feedback from a qualitative perspective to see if it evokes the right emotion, if people know what it is, if it's like some weird fantasy weapon and they want to make sure people actually know it's a weapon, for example. Yeah, the goal is to make it easier to test early.
Yeah, the whole thing about getting this sentiment from people, seeing them play, getting feedback early on. I'm getting a lot of builds from developers that, are figuring out, hey, what could I advise them to do with the game? And I've been doing these play tests, like focus groups with some kids who play a lot of games. So I was getting a shooter game, for instance, from a developer. And I asked some kids who were big battle royale gamers, play Brawl Stars, Zuba, those kind of games. So them to actually play this other game that I had on test flight. And I got so much insight when I saw them playing for like several sessions. Like I don't see the developers doing it that much because they're kind of busy building the games. So that still feels like something that they think they know enough of what makes the game work and they don't need a test, but hopefully it's changing.
Yeah, I think it's still an underutilized method. It's so valuable. The thing that really cheers me up when I think about this is that back then in 2012, when we started working on this, people thought we were doing QA and they never ever heard the term playtesting. And even focus groups was something that was still pretty rarely used. And nowadays, thanks to a lot of games that also really invested in creating great experiences for the players, everybody is aware of that. All the industry conferences usually have some talks about user experience. The word playtesting is used a lot. And more, the devs are aware of that. And I think it's just hard to get started. Like there are so many things you focus on when making a game. And now there's this new thing that you also should care about. And if you haven't experienced the value that you can get from that yourself, yeah, it feels like something that you could do later. And that's what we often see. People feel they're not ready yet. The build is not in the right shape yet. No, I still need to fix those bugs. And what we always say is just start. You're going to learn something in that. And the earlier that they start testing, the cheaper it's going to be for them to make any changes.
Yeah.
Like in this case that you described, if you launch the game already and then you find out, oh, competitors are like doing this and this and this, and people really don't understand what I did here, it will cost you a lot to make those changes. But if you had tested a very early build that didn't look pretty yet, you got to ignore some feedback about the art maybe because that's not done yet. But you can learn about the essentials.
Yeah, and those kind of like, if you're in a genre where there's other people already, what are your differentiators and are they actually adding value or creating negative value? That's not nice.
Yeah, what I always think is so important is to know what your players know. If I'm making a game that is base builder like Clash of Clans, I can expect a lot of knowledge about that genre nowadays.
Yes.
But if I make a game that is in a very new genre, I might not be able to rely on that. I have to explain more things, but it depends a lot on how I focus my game in the future. Like, will it only aim at those hardcore players of that genre? Or do I want to pull in people from other genres who might never have experienced a game like this? And yeah, it's so important to just see how these different groups will also behave in your game, so you can make sure that you really craft that experience for them that you want to achieve.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. Do you think like small companies should have dedicated game user research people, or is it something that it should be something that a person already responsible for designing the game, building the game, those people should already pick this up and go from there?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think especially early on, it's really important to instill this method of iterating on your player experience. Game designers have a vision in mind for the game that they want to realize, and showing them that there are tools to test whether they are achieving that vision, I think, is the first thing that you got to do in a small studio. You want to make sure that it's okay to iterate on the game, that it's okay to test something that isn't done yet. Those are a lot of the reservations that we always meet at smaller studios. And if you're building a culture around testing, iterating, and experimenting and doing what's best for your players, in the future, when your team is also a bit bigger, you have more capital to also invest it into your staff, hiring a user researcher can really help, because they've got all the knowledge about the best methods. They can make sure that your tests are following the best practices, that you're not testing something and drawing the wrong conclusions. But I think that can also only work well if your team is receptive for that approach. Because that's what we see a lot, like at the user research conferences, a big part is always talking about how to get buy-in from the game teams, because it's still a relatively new discipline. And I think if you build your studio focusing on iterating, not just on like all the other parts that you iterate on, but also on the player experience, later on, when you feel like you just need a little more professionalism in your playtesting, you're going to have such a good setup already to bring that first user researcher in there, and they can really have an impact from day one.
Yeah, the culture is there already, and it's easy to get in. Yeah. There's also the kind of like think about the cycle there of testing the builds, looking for the findings, and then testing again when you've iterated based on the findings. I would guess that with a smaller team, it's quicker to do those tests, working and iterating, versus bigger teams. What have you seen there? Any differences?
I think it doesn't depend so much on the team size, actually, but it depends on making time for that in your sprints. Everybody works agile nowadays, and I see it a lot where teams are excited to do playtesting and they finish their sprint. They're uploading their build. They're having a really nice playtest. They watch those videos, find some things that they want to fix. There's no time to fix it because nobody thought about reserving some time in the next sprint to actually address the findings from the playtest. And that happens in teams big and small. It's something that can be fixed relatively easily if you have some buy-in from the higher ups on also making space in the schedule for that. But I think that's the one defining factor for, like, will you keep up with playtesting? Will you also get a lot out of it? Or is it more like a one-off? We'll fix a few issues and maybe we do it once more before we launch. Both approaches work, but if you constantly allow for some time to do these tests, you're gonna make sure that you don't diverge too much from this like golden path that you want your players to follow.
Yeah. That actually leads me to think about like one thing where you probably are still figuring this out, but when you have a game that's live and has been live for a long time and you want to test an end game feature, it must still be a little bit of a problem. How do you get these fresh eyes that are seeing the game for the first time to actually test an end game feature? Have you come up with a solution for that yet?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. If the games are really popular, we can usually find those players even in our own database. And I know this is probably not what you're thinking of, but let's say like I've got a match 3 game. I want to test my Majestic level 1000 because it's amazing and I need people who know the mechanics already. There's probably quite a spread of like different skill levels that players could be in to understand this level and to enjoy it. So what we usually do in those cases is we talk with the developers. We want to understand what knowledge the players would need to enjoy that. And then we try and finding those players. And when they then play those levels, it's not exactly as somebody who would have gone from like 1 to 999 and then played level 1000, but it's close enough. And another way might also be that when you design a test, you get people who are completely fresh. You first bring them up to speed, kind of let them play a bit here and there, maybe for a few days. And then you could ramp up, say, the difficulty or like bring them to new parts of the game, let them play a bit there until they're ready for that like end game content that you want to test. But of course, it depends if we're talking about like you need to play for 2 years to get there or for 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's more and more game user research services popping up, and devs have an easy day now compared 10 years ago. But what do you think is kind of like the hard thing still there for playtesting that needs to be solved?
I think a really difficult part is knowing how to measure the impact that your playtesting has. And that is like such an important topic because you want to make the case for playtesting to the executives, especially if you're at a bigger studio. You want to establish this practice. They want to see numbers and they want to see what the ROI of running these playtests, of hiring these user researchers is going to be. And that is something that there definitely is a positive ROI, but it's harder to quantify than with other methods. If you're thinking about an A/B test and let's test this pack versus that pack, you'll have some black and white numbers at the end with a confidence score. And you can see, okay, this method just made me this and this much more money. Playtesting often comes in early in the development and you don't have a version B that you're going to launch to see how would it have been if we did this and this character design, if we completely redesigned the controls. And I think that is why there's a bit of an uphill battle for the uptake of playtesting. But the user researchers are finding ways to actually quantify that. There's a great conference every year where games user researchers meet, and they had a talk about redesigning the shop in a free-to-play game. And they did a lot of usability testing to identify issues, to also see what the experience was of purchasing something. And then they put those changes into the game, A/B tested it. And the versions that were the result of a lot of research, UX testing, performed much better. And the same goes for other smaller aspects of the game. So more and more, we're having that data, we're able to make that case. But I think that's still hard about playtesting and convincing, especially the people in bigger studios, to give it enough funds to really build those teams around that.
That is a good point. I think the learnings that people are sharing at these conferences is very valuable. You can try out so many different things and figure out that, hey, this revealed something new that this previous kind of test couldn't reveal. And I definitely recommend the conference. I've been to that a few times. I'll actually link it up in the blog post related to this episode so people can find the conference details. I think it's always the same time as GDC, and then the other one is in London, usually at the other end of the year.
Yeah, a few things are being mixed up now. The GDC one is now in Montreal,
They moved it.
They moved it. And this year, the one that often happens in London is in Germany, in Munich.
Wow.
At the end of the month. So always some change there. It's a wonderful conference. I've been going every year for the last 5 or 6 years.
It's called Games UR, is the conference.
Yeah, Games UR Summit.
Yeah, Games UR Summit. I'll put the link there in the blog post. Hey man, let's go into some final questions here. What is your favorite book and why?
Oh, that's a tough one. I read a lot of sci-fi. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to only tell you one. The one book or the one series that really fascinated me is The Three-Body Problem. I think a lot of people probably read that one. It's written by a Chinese author and has been only recently translated to English. It is such a fascinating sci-fi book. I can't sum up 3 books in like one sentence, possibly. Yeah. Another recommendation would be A Long Way to a Small and Angry Planet. I just finished that book. It is fun sci-fi read, has a lot of aliens, and it really makes you think about how you are thinking about people from different countries that you might not fully understand, because this book does that same thing with those different alien species. And I read a lot of sci-fi because I think it's a nice way to not think about work for once.
Nice. That's really good advice for people thinking about the book for the Christmas holidays for themselves. If you could give one playtesting advice for early stage game companies, what would that be?
Just get started. There are so many reasons to not test, and the hardest part is always getting over that initial hump. Just take whatever build you have. Doesn't have to be perfect. Doesn't have to look great. Put it out there and see what people are doing. You'll have to ignore a few parts of their feedback because you know what in your game is not ready for prime time yet. But look at what people are doing. Look at whether they are able to play your game, at whether they are able to do those essential core things in your game that are crucial to somebody having fun. And then just work on that.
Yeah, great advice. Hey, to wrap it up, where can people find more about Playtest Cloud?
Of course, on our website, playtestcloud.com. We're also pretty active on YouTube and our blog. And you can also usually meet us at all the big mobile gaming conferences and, of course, at the Games User Research Conference we also talked about earlier.
Cool. Thanks a lot, man, for coming on the show, and have a good weekend.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That's it for this week's episode. Please check out our website at elitegamedevelopers.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. We'll be back next week, so see you then. Ciao.